down here so I can start.
Where do you want it, right?
All right, sir.
Here, inside the hands. That's gonna happen real fast. You have to jump over those. Alt tap. Alt tap. Two more. Yeah, go that way. Tap. Tap. What do you call it?
Academic speech. Technical speech.
We think, so.
Who wants to go? Did you put the date? What'd you put? Did you take it out?
NOB period. Bond.
Okay. Red signs out there.
So go back to the Google Hangouts. Yep.
They're not getting called back because it's easy.
It takes about 30 seconds or so. Because what it does is it actually encodes it. That's where we drop off.
So I see you got the memo that says if you have the other room for everybody.
Live. If you're live. Checking all of our for everyone.
Good evening, everybody. It is Thursday, November 5th. This is the Academic Standards Committee meeting. I'm Denise Brooks. I'm school board member and chair of the Academic Standards Committee. Tonight, our topic will be a review of our state testing. For those of you who are listening at home, we have some staff members and a few board members in the room, as well as 3 members of the public. If the other board members would just introduce themselves.
Andy Block?
Wendy Thomas.
Great. I guess we can just jump right in.
Good, okay. Good evening. We do this each year around this time, usually based on when we're getting the state results back. That's varied typically from year to year. And we finally have all of our results in, enough that we feel comfortable sharing some of our initial look at the numbers. This year is a little bit different than in previous years because there's some uniqueness to what has happened with state testing. As we go through the presentation, you'll see and hear some of those things, but this has been a very different year for us compared to previous years and how Pennsylvania has offered the state testing through the high schools, for elementary, middle, and high school. So really part of this for us as a school district is to take these numbers, look at them, and try to make meaning. I mean, that's really what we value out of the state testing information, an opportunity to see how our students perform compared to other students in the state, how our schools perform versus other schools in the state, how we perform as a district versus other districts in the state, because unfortunately or fortunately, it's the single measure we have that all public schools participate in. We do a lot of other testing. You know, we do AP testing and SAT and PSATs at the high schools. However, those are selected students, those who elect to take those. So we do get some information from those, but rarely at a middle or an elementary school do you have any other common assessments. We have them within the district. We just don't have them that are similar or the same as what other districts participate in. Yeah, we're
Escape here and do it again.
I'm always afraid because of that. We're on that hangout. Okay, let's try it. Let's do this and maybe we'll just start it again. Hopefully it's still broadcasting. I'm assuming it is. Maybe you want to check it. Matt asked me. So just a couple of things that are unique to this year. In previous years, the past couple of years, we've had a school performance profile for each of the schools within the district. This year, the state has changed that. There is no school performance profile for the elementaries and the middle schools for grades 3 to 8. The reason being that was related to the change in the state testing. So the only school performance profiles we have for this year are for the high schools. Interestingly, again, we just received the high school performance profiles Friday afternoon. And the way information flows in the state, it makes this very difficult to know what's happening when. We were at Joe McClay and I were at the IU earlier that day. We had heard from Mike Masco, the systems executive director, that he had heard that they may not be releasing them until much later, if at all. And then that Friday afternoon, Dr. Frazier gets an email saying they're out and they're going to be released this week. And so they did come out Friday for school districts to review, and then yesterday for the public. It froze on us.
Obviously, we're not experts at this yet.
A small technical error. Please stand by.
No, it's not what's going on.
So while Matt's working on that, a couple of other things that I'll share with you about the school performance profile. There is conversation now about what may happen in the future with school performance profiles. There are some meetings taking place around the state. We'll have the opportunity to be a part of those discussions later this month. And really what they are looking at is maybe a complete revamping of the school performance profile. What's weighted, what they report, what contributes to the score. And really we can't say a whole lot more other than that because we haven't had that opportunity to hear and see what state officials are suggesting and looking for input on. But we do know that there's likely going to be some change. So we'll have more to report out in the future. Again, these are, from our understanding at the state level, really going to be information gathering and sharing. And then probably later in the spring, maybe we'll get a sense of where PDE is planning to go with this. Dr. Frazier, anything you want to add to that?
No, that's very much what it is. What the Pennsylvania Department of Education has been doing is making their rounds throughout the state to the various intermediate units. So ours is coming up in another couple Fridays. So Joe McClay, Director of Elementary Education, Barry as Director of Secondary Education, and myself will be there. Colleagues from my past in Chester County, I know that they already had their day down there, and a definite proposal was put out, is being put out by the state, and they're basically looking for a reaction to that. So it's a bit of a listening tour, but it's also a bit of, hey, here's what we're already thinking. Now react to this, and we'll take your reaction into consideration. Also had a conversation last week with David Volkman, who is the Deputy Secretary of Education for PDE, and he iterated this dynamic in very much those same terms. So I think it's safe to say that the SPP will change radically from this point, from how we know it now, for what it will be in the future, and that's a bit frustrating because it's already been apples to oranges from one year to the next, including with our current 2 high school scores, where they added some pieces that were not in there last year or the year before. So it makes it virtually impossible to compare overall performance unless you start dissecting the specific inputs into it. You can do it at that level, but from an overall standpoint, to see that the score went, for instance, from 90 to 85 that doesn't begin to tell the whole story because the formula, the criteria is constantly changing. What's expected to be seen for next year is radical changes with a de-emphasis on state testing and a greater emphasis on some other aspects that we haven't seen yet, but presumably to include some things like school safety measures and school discipline measures. And at this point, we're not quite sure what else. So again, we'll go to this meeting at the Bucks IU here in a couple of weeks and we'll get more information on it. And certainly we'll be sharing that with our audience.
Is there any conversation on PFAS and some high school schools, traditionally higher performing schools?
From the PBOS?
PFAS, is that a topic of conversation?
The only topic of conversation with PBOS is that the federal government right now requires PBOS. They require that growth piece, and in fact, they require it, if anything, to be weighted more heavily than what we have it currently in our system. And that's also true for educator effectiveness or teacher and principal evaluation. And Pennsylvania has had an approach to have these things called SLOs, student learning objectives. And there's also, I know, a critical lens being applied to those SLOs. So as we become, want to say, I guess, in Pennsylvania public education, the only constant is change. And it's frustrating because you need some sense of stability and constancy and actually have time to get good at something, but it seems like change is coming, and I don't know that as educators we're going to complain about all of these changes because we need some course corrections, but it sure would be nice at the state level to figure this out and then stick with a system for a period of years so that we can actually figure out what works and then focus on refining instead of being in a constant place of just trying to understand the system and first comply with it before you even worry about being effective with it. I will say too, and I'll say this at a board meeting later this evening as well, that my personal level of confidence and faith in the folks that we have in charge at PDE right now is exceptionally high. Pedro Rivera, the Secretary of Education, I have a tremendous amount of faith in. I am thrilled that he elevated David Volkman to number 2 in charge of the state. And from my conversation with Mr. Volkman last Friday, very, very encouraged by what he had to say. So I think that there are positive signs that are coming our way. The federal government indicated some things along those lines as well, which was a nice change of course in terms of reducing testing and emphasis on testing. Some of it might be conjecture, but how it results in policy, I think, is the bigger piece. And it's a tone that's a good one. It's a change, and it's a welcome change. You put that together with who we have running Harrisburg right now from a Department of Education standpoint, I feel good about it. And I think that we're going to be in a better place 2 or 3 years from now than what we are right now.
So in essence, then, this becomes a new baseline, because you can't compare it to something else until you can analyze the data and see certain, pieces of information or outliers that could require your attention. But in terms of trying to understand long-term implications, this becomes the baseline. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in some senses, we've had a new baseline each year because even this year with the high school SPPs, they added 2 closing achievement gaps piece, one for all students in the school and one for what they call historically underperforming students. That was there before for the biology Keystone exam. It was not there for the algebra exam or the literature exam. It is this year, it wasn't last year. So when you look at the results, and yes, our scores dropped, you look at why they dropped, primarily that's why they dropped. So if you extract those pieces out and you go apples to apples, we actually had a pretty solid.
Well, it was weird because when I saw some preliminary data and I saw tremendous growth and improvement in some of the high school sports. So I was expecting something different. I didn't realize that they would completely reconfigure the formulas, but so it's disappointing that, I guess we'll get to that, but it's disappointing that things appear worse, but in many cases it was better. So.
It is. It's unfortunate, and unfortunately, the typical member of the public, all you know is what you see in the newspaper or read online. So you see the headlines, you see the bylines, you see you read those articles, and it's unfortunate because the issues are much, much deeper than what the story is that's being told.
And I should have said that Robert and Joe were going to be a part of this presentation and, adding some information as we move forward. So part of this was just discussed with Dr. Fraser about some of the changes, potential changes in legislation. We're not exactly sure where all of this currently sits. We do know that there's conversation, and it looks like it's pretty legitimate consideration about delaying the implementation of the Keystone exams as a graduation requirement. They have not done that yet. We're assuming that the budget will take the priority, and after that, maybe we'll get to some of this business.
So what implication would that have on the PBAs that are already in progress?
They're great questions. We're not even sure, and I didn't even speak to Robert about it. I had this conversation with the high schools today. We're not even sure. We've done away with the graduation project because we were given that opportunity with this implementation, and then we sat there and said, well, would they possibly do that and say that they need a graduation project when you'll have every senior in the graduating class not having started it? So we just don't know what their thinking would be. Our assumption would be that if people did the PBA, or if they're in the middle of it, that we could probably stop if they are in the graduating class of 17 or 18. If they're in the graduating class of 19 and it's a 2-year delay, they would need to keep moving forward anyhow. Some that have completed it,
Can't go back.
We can't go back. They're discussing reducing the amount of testing that is required. Again, we're not exactly sure what that would mean here in Council Rock. And again, there's a lot of conversations. Some of these conversations begin at the federal level and trickle down to the state, and then the state can certainly, like Council Rock, we talk about with standards, you can always go a little bit more, but you can't go less. So, until all those conversations happen at both the national level and then see what the state gets approved by the feds, then we'll find out what it means here in Council Rock. So we have some time before we'll recognize that. And the last one is they're talking about now the evaluations for teachers and principals have a component or a number of components that are tied to student achievement data through the testing, and they're discussing removing that from that evaluation process. So again, just to give you a sense of where they are, they're not highlights for today, but hopefully we'll be having more conversation in the future. So let's talk about the school performance profiles. We said it's specific to the high school this year. Really what we're going to do is get into the profile and give you a sense of it, but we just thought we might give you an idea of what makes up the score for students. And you'll come to realize that 80% of the score is really based on, in this case for high schools, their Keystone exam data. So all of it filters into 80% of those numbers. Then you'll see a couple of other things that can play out. So the academic achievement, you can see that Keystones for the literature, for the Algebra 1, and for the biology are up there. They do a little bit with the industry-based standards that our students at MBIT contribute back to our high school scores. And then lastly, they look at the SAT and ACT scores of our students. When they do this, they look at the cohort of students that are our current seniors as they wrapped up this testing through the end of their junior year. So in other words, if you have a student who's a senior and took the summer Keystone exam and scored proficient, that score would not contribute at that point. So it has to be at the end of their junior year for those numbers to work into the calculation. What Dr. Fraser talked about, this kind of new component last year for the high schools, this bottom piece where it's the science biology for closing the achievement gap, that was included in the score. The other two were not. So where they've added algebra and literature, they're new components this year. Just very quickly, what it's designed to do, and you can see that it's repeated for historically underperforming. So there's a total of 10% attached to these two pieces of the score. They look at the entire student body. Again, we're looking at the cohort of 11th grade students. And in each of those categories, the Algebra 1, the literature, and the biology, we'll just take Algebra 1. If 80% of your students were scoring proficient out of that cohort of 11th graders in Algebra 1, then 20% are not. So they take half of the 20%, 10%, give you 6 years and split that up evenly. I should have picked a number that's more easily visible, but so whatever that would be, that percent plus for each of those 6 years, we'd have to make that gain. So if we were at 80% this year, next year we'd have to be at 81 point something, and then the following year we'd have to be at 82 point something, and you continue along that line until they recalculate that again after the 6 years, and then see again where that gap is to get you to 100%. And what happened was,
Can I ask a question?
I'm sure.
So and I mean, I'm paying attention that closely, but with No Child Left Behind, one of the difficulties was everybody ends up at 100%, which is not feasible, right? So in this new rejiggered system, is it the same impossible situation at the end? Is this 100% the same kind of unreasonable 100% that we good enough?
Sooner or later it will be. I mean, really, the closer you get to 100%, the more difficult it will be to get these points under this current system. Now, again, this may be something they redesign if they come out with a new school performance profile. But in this particular case, what we are seeing is our students achieving at the proficient rate are relatively high. So to continue to get higher is going to be difficult. Staying even is not moving ahead, thus you lose points. You don't lose points, you just don't gain the points that you can in this area. And then as attached, that same thing is attached to students, the underperforming, just to give you that definition, are students that are either ELL, socioeconomic status, or IEP. So they can only count as one, even if they meet all 3 criteria, but that group of students is also combined as a cohort group, and then that calculation is done for them also.
To get to 100%.
Again, correct.
Always
100% proficient?
This rest piece, as Barry had said, the way that closing the achievement gaps work is a little bit different than the old connotation under NCLB. The old connotation was by 2014, it was 100%. That's not exactly what this is. What it's saying is we had our baseline year, which was, I think, the 2012-13 year. So they said that's your baseline year. So from that point forward, whatever your percent was, you have 6 years, right? And you have 6 years to eradicate half of that gap between whatever your score is and 100%. So the simple math number that I've always used is 40%, right? Which is a low number, but perhaps with historically underperforming, that's a little bit more realistic than obviously our overall population. So if you're at 40% proficient in advanced, then you're at 60% non-proficient, right? So you need to close half of that. So you need to close 30% over 6 years, 30% divided by 6, 5% annually. So come year 1, then 13, 14, you got to raise that score by 5. You got to get up to 45%. The next year, another 5%. The next year, another 5%. That becomes the measure. And if you get the entire measure, whether it's 5% or whatever it is, then you get all points. And there's sort of a sliding scale, right? So it's not an all or nothing. If you get a portion of that, but not the entire thing, then you get each year points as well.
Each year.
Each year.
That was my first question. My second question is, if you don't achieve the first threshold in year 1, say the 5% increments, you get to 3. What's the goal for the following year?
Still 10.
Raise it to still 10.
Still 10.
So if you are very bad in the first 2 years, the chance of coming out of that hole.
So there's no course correction in that 6-year window?
No, the system is 6 years, you have 6 years, eradicate half again.
And then theoretically, at that point, if you had gotten up to the 70, then you're on a new 6-year that's going to put you on how to get to the next.
Theoretically, I don't know that the regulations thought quite that far out.
I don't think they thought short term anyway.
It's
So.
up to 6 years. It's kind of like NCOB, right? Which 01 and projecting up to 2014, but it was due for reauthorization in what, 07 or 08? And here we still are.
So instead of reaching 100% at the end, like No Child Left Behind, you're supposed to reach half of the way between where you are and 100%.
Exactly.
So that's better. That sounds
Yeah,
more
but the
plausible.
implication is different.
I mean,
The
So-
starting point's still 100%. Then say, a realistic achievement is 95% a year, or 90 or whatever, something, and then try to get to there. The goal is still,
Yeah, I mean, the target is still 100.
I thought after 6 years, you're just supposed to be halfway.
Yeah, but it's calculated on an assumption
yeah.
that you're aiming for the 100.
Well, I mean, it's like the ideal state, like absolute zero, you never get there, but at least it's defined.
Right.
So, because the legislation hasn't said you'll ever get to 100%, is what you're saying.
That's, the Pennsylvania legislature has not said that, that's correct.
So, I mean,
Now, remember,
This is
NCLB is still on the books.
right,
So we're operating, as many states are, under a waiver. So that's why we're not obligated to that 100%. But NCLB is still on the books because that act has yet to be reauthorized.
And it's always important to remember that you're always talking about a different cohort of students. So you're not measuring students as a group for their growth. The current 12th graders that contributed to this score are gone. So if this were to stay into place, we're looking at next year's 12th graders. So it's a whole different measuring stick. And again, when you don't meet it one year, we know that it's going to be much more difficult to meet it next year. So if this stays in place, it will be very difficult to get these points because now we have to make up for what we didn't get this current year, plus what we already were due for the following year. Again, now the other 40% or big component of this is all based on student growth. So in this case, looking again at those same Keystone exams, this is not based on achievement. This is based on whether the students made an adequate progress of at least a year based on the PBAS model. Okay, so this is all about growth. Then there are some other indicators, graduation. They don't use promotion rate. That's a component for elementaries and middle schools if they were in place. Attendance, they do look at the AP. We don't do IB and we don't factor in our college credit. We just don't have students that participate in those. And then they look at the PSATs and they do a calculation to get a sense of how many points, again, contribute to your SPP. And then they offer some extra credit.
So that, just go back to that for a second. So that encourages us to suggest that kids who might not be best suited take a PSAT, take a PSAT, versus suggesting they go to trade schools.
Well, yeah, I mean, they want to see students participating. I mean, it's a participation rate. So, and our participation rate is high.
But
We've met this.
as more and more schools, colleges are going test optional, and in the restructuring of the SAT to its new format, I think that there could be a culture of students who realize that the PSAT is really just a scholarship competition and not suited for them.
Right.
So knowing that, it's not a huge percentage of what this is, but it's big enough that could be a problem too.
And we're seeing a larger percentage of our students participate in the ACT also. So more than
Right, and that's not
right.
counted
Not for this piece. It's
Right,
included in the ACT test, but not in their
Right.
pre-test.
Yeah, and that's been happening across the nation.
Yes.
Actually, more students now take the ACT than take the SAT.
And that's why the SAT redesigned the test.
Sure is. Business strategy.
And you'll see some of the extra credit opportunities. Again, these are really based on students who are scoring in the advanced category in the testing, including at NBIT for the industry-based component, and then the AP program and some extra credit points. So you can actually score a total of 107 points. That's the maximum score if you got every component and the SPP along with the 7 extra credit points.
So wait, the AP scores, just remind me because I can't remember. The AP scores are also calculated at junior year?
Yes, everything is calculated through June of their junior year.
Which is interesting since the highest number of test taking is probably in the senior year, but anyway.
And again, we're very fortunate because we hit those components
Right.
as you'll see. So this will give you a sense of our the SPP's been in place for 3 years. This is the 3rd year. So you can see 12, 13 over to the right, last year's scores and then this year. So we were, pretty consistent in those first 2 years. That slight decline on North and South, very close, 0.2 difference. We've kind of poked around to get a sense of other schools, probably more declines than staying steady or increases, but it is all over the board. Very difficult to, draw any conclusions this early in our look at what's occurred. But, our principals talk to other principals, we get a chance to talk to other district level folks, just trying to get a sense. For most people, as it is with us, it appears that the decline was really based on adding in that factor that we spoke about of closing the achievement gap in those two other tested areas that were added this year, that those points, we were in the calculation, but we didn't earn them. So that's
Right, because
probably.
like I said, I saw some of other data, and I had actually had a conversation at a recent PTO meeting at South, and the number of students that performed advanced, was a dramatic improvement, at least at South. And so it's pretty ironic how it all translates into this.
So I'm gonna, I don't think for the viewing audience, this is going to show, and based on what Matt said, he doesn't want us to mess with this, but this is a public site, so folks can go to the school performance profile site. We thought we'd just take you to the actual scorecard, give you a look, and then people can, if they want to dig deeper, can go to the site and spend some time. So we'll just go to North first and look specifically at their performance. I'm not going to read these to you, it'll give you a chance to take a look. Just very quickly, this would be the percentage of current seniors that scored proficient or advanced. If you look at the key up top, you get a sense based on this. If you wanted to just get that quick look without looking at the numbers to get a sense of how the school performed, you can see again, these 5 areas here where you see the red triangles going down were areas that were, 4 of those were new this year. So that was that closing the achievement gap. So you can see why we believe that was the biggest contributor to our decline in score. And then you can see through the extra credit, the PVAS.
So when you're saying closing the gap, but it's year 0, so there's no movement to close the gap, and that's.
No, they used the 2013 score as the baseline, and the score was calculated. It's different in each subject area and different for each school. Calculated what that difference from that point to 100% was, and we had to close that gap by half that.
And was it the same test though?
Well, it's the Keystone exam. The test is never the same.
But it was the same,
So it's, yeah.
basically the same.
Yeah, this was not a case of what we had with the SSAs, where was it redesigned?
Oh,
This was not that.
It's hard for me to keep it straight. Not limited.
It is for us.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, growth, again, this picture here, regardless of the student's proficiency rate, is speaking to how much progress the student made. So whether they were an advanced student, this would speak to they still showed a year's worth of growth. If they were a basic student, they may have stayed basic, but they still showed a year's worth of growth in their academic standard.
Who sets the measure for the year's worth of growth?
Who what?
Who sets the bar?
The state.
Okay.
Well, and it's not a bar, we want, that's a long conversation.
That's fine.
And you can see the extra credit components that we received. So that was the north calculation. So let's quickly take a peek at south. And again, I'm going through quickly because people can access these now on the public site. So you can see the south components. Again, 5 of those 6 that did the downward trend. So
So that's our 2.5% in an example or whatever. The percent we were supposed to grow, we didn't do it, so we got 0.
these would be a collective total here would be 10% of the score.
And I see 0, 0,
Yes.
0, 0.
Right.
The only one that we got partial was what, Bio,
Yep.
right, for the store.
And here, yep, for both. We got-
But without really changing your culture, there's going to be a ton of inertia in these test scores, right? I mean, you really have to knuckle down and put some effort to move those numbers. It just doesn't happen by accident.
Absolutely.
So if people want to move these numbers, it's a ton of work, right?
Well, but the other point is that it's a comparison to a year that's a different cohort of students.
Right.
Right.
It's different.
So,
No, but even so,
but I'm just saying that in and of itself, it's not necessarily a reflection of the same students. It's sort of misleading because it says, have you closed the achievement gap? You're comparing different students.
But odds are
So-
that they're
Even if you
pretty
do
much
this
the
on a
same.
board, I think you don't know.
Right.
But don't, I mean, is it the case that the scores were worse or they were pretty much the same?
Which scores?
The score, over
The achievement result scores?
The difference in the scores was
You
basically.
take out the part we had to grow by. Did we do better or the same as last year with this level?
That's an interesting question to
Well,
do the calculation, because those, you couldn't gain those points last year. So they.
Right, but were our
So we
scores
took them out this year,
against
that's what I'm saying.
the actual tests, our advanced and proficient, were those, how did that stack up against last year?
Right, because that's what I'm saying. I
Yeah.
looked at some of that data, and I didn't look at everything, but I looked at certain
It
just
was
certain key
way
points. I thought our SVPs were gonna go up because I saw there was tremendous movement.
There's some
I
areas.
focused primarily on one school, and actually I can't remember which one it was now, but I was surprised because you do see a lot of more in the advanced and proficient categories.
So here's a quick, just to give you that sense, and they don't go into this detail in the previous year's score, but this is South's 13-14, so their
Right.
previous score, just to give you a sense of it. So here's where you see their achievement levels, okay? So-
748,
Yeah, good. So then when we jump over here to their academic performance this year, you get a sense of it. So- They're down a little bit, and that's why you see, pardon me?
And up in science.
Yeah.
Right, good. That makes sense.
So you don't see a huge decline in the overall achievement of, achievement rates for proficiency in any of those tests. You see a slight decline or, some minor changes. So, and again, we just received these on Friday, so our high schools had their first look on Monday. So it's data that is important to us that we want to look at, but again, the caution is not knowing where they're going, what the emphasis will be next time around. So just again, to give you that sense, if folks want to, and I'll just put it here for your viewing pleasure, they'll actually lay out the entire calculation for you when you click at the bottom of the page, view calculation. So you'll see the potential points available in each of the areas, how they calculated our scores, and how that total led to our set. Okay?
And I want to say too, just for the board's edification in particular, that what this talks about, as Barry has indicated, is the 11th grade cohort. So what that's a reflection of then is that some students took these tests, algebra would be the classic example, 3 years prior, right? Or bio a year or two before, and lit is a 10th grade exam for us. So it's a reflection both of students taking that test for the first time as an end of course exam. The majority scored proficient or advanced. Those who didn't then have gone into a retest cycle. So what this is a reflection of is those who achieve proficiency plus the first time around, as well as those students who achieve proficiency plus through one or more retake opportunities. So the reason why I bring that up is because the hope here that we have as a school district is that Keystone exams are going to go away as a graduation requirement. It's not going to happen immediately. What's first going to happen is that hopefully there will be this 2-year moratorium as part of the omnibus bill that goes through with the budget, and then hopefully over those intervening 2 years, there's additional studies, and fiscal studies included, and then it's going to go away. So what that means is that we're still going to give Keystone exams or fill in the blank for whatever exam it would become. The exam is always going to be there. So the most important lens for us goes back to first-time test takers. Those end-of-course test takers, how are our results as a school district for end-of-course test takers? Because what that speaks to, when you're able to just isolate that group of students and that data set, is that speaks to our core curriculum program for Algebra 1, for Bio, and for 10th grade English. So one of the pieces that's problematic though is that we can siphon off that data for ourselves. We don't get a data set from the state yet, anyway, that allows us to see that same data for the other 499 school districts and the 1,000 plus high schools. So from a ranking standpoint to say, well, hey, how does this compare relative to the larger pool? We can't see that, but at least it's important for us to see, to say, hey, how are we doing? Because it's really different to be successful through the core curricular program as opposed to remediation and interventions and supplemental instruction that occurs, and capture students that way. So I point that out because our hope is that the graduation piece of this is going to be going away completely. And we're more optimistic than not that it's going to. But that's a really important lens that, just so you know, administratively, we take a look at, and then we work with our principals, we work with our curriculum coordinators, and then ultimately with our teachers on to make sure that those results first go around core curriculum, and we're meeting those needs, and the results are where we believe they should be.
So that takes us to that conversation. That's a great segue because that's what we wanted to also show. So the numbers you see here are for first-time test takers. So anybody that was in this mix, and we were using our spring testing because that's our largest group of testers, and it's really the only time a student takes the test at the end of the course. So anybody else that takes it at another time is either in makeup or a repeat or, a year removed from when they had the actual course for which the test was designed. So you can look here, and this is a 3-year look, but this would be the group for this most recent spring testing at the schools. The interesting thing that is important to realize is that in algebra only, that about 40% or so of our students are attributed, in this case, back to the middle schools because that's where they have Algebra 1. So that has a little bit of an influence on these numbers because you're taking that group out for this calculation. They're factored back in for that cohort group when it's an SPP score because they're looking at 11th graders. So this just gives you that sense of how our students are doing.
When you say proficient, you mean proficient or better?
Proficient or better, that's correct. So this is proficient or advanced. So the state average was 50%. I didn't put the number tested, it was thousands, as you can imagine. Then you can see in each of our buildings, the testing group and the proficiency rates. Now again, what you'll see is you'll see different numbers in each of these tested areas based on when students take the courses. So you'll see a lower number of students at North and South taking the Algebra 1, and you'll see a much higher number, obviously, taking the biology and literature when we go to those next slides, because those students only take those courses at the high school. Okay, everybody good with that one? So here's our literature. And this is what, Robert was speaking to. We know what the state proficiency rates are, but we have no idea where we fit. If these are outstanding, top 1%, top 5%, top 10%, we wouldn't know because we don't have, unless you call all the high schools around and ask them how they did, we wouldn't be able to do that. The state does not publish that list for Keystone exams. And then we'll take a quick look at biology.
Does the state break down the proficiency for school districts by different demographics? So if we wanted to compare apples and apples, Council Rock, with other school districts that are...
No, not for Keystone exams. We have no other comparison other than the state totals. They don't publish the other districts. And my guess is they probably don't because there's a number of different scores that they would publish. There's the cohort score, which is the one that contributes to the SPP. We have to filter out in the spring because we have some retesters in the spring. So we have to filter those students out to get our first time. Now, they're not a huge number, but you do have to filter them out. Then you have a summer Keystone exam test and you have a winter Keystone exam test. So there's a lot of, all schools are required to offer at least 3 testing dates, and you have students, all over based on when they're doing their retest. Most of the spring, the majority of the spring is a first-time test taker, and that's probably the one that's most important for us because, again, it's the end of the course, and it's the largest number of our students who are taking the course and taking the exam for the first time.
If we wanted to, we can compare our results with Central Bucks school by school manually. We can go in and compare
Yes, we have to go into their sites and try and pull some information. I'm not even sure. Even the SPP would not provide us what we're looking for because that becomes the cohort. So you'd have to actually go up to the IU and ask all the county schools to bring their numbers, and make sure that they calculated them right, because everybody does this internally, to make sure you're comparing apples to apples.
To do this first time test takers look, the true end of course look, which we feel is the most paramount data set that we get from this, and frankly, the most meaningful. We don't get that through any channel for any other school district but ours. So, yeah, we leverage our contacts, and rest assured, once this email came out on Friday, we saw our scores were all running up the phone lines and texting, our colleagues from around it saying, hey, what happened with you guys? Are we in an anomaly, or are we following a trend, or what's happening here? So that's what happens, but that's not obviously an official way of doing things.
Okay, so we just wanted to put this out there. I know folks have seen this. If you had a child that came home with a PSSA result, you saw this information. Dr. Frazier, in the early part of the school year, had sent this out in the listserv because it was really an opportunity for us to give an explanation and context to what the PSSA scores were this year. So a couple of things happened that kind of changed the landscape for PSSAs, which is why we said we're resetting the bar and starting again so that we have a new baseline. One is that for the first time this past spring, the the PSSAs were aligned to the new Pennsylvania core standards. Previously, they were not. So that really changed what was being tested at different grade levels, et cetera.
So I gotta ask another basic question, because I'm still trying to catch up. So the Keystones, are they aligned with the core standards as well?
And have been. But please remember, the PA core standards, the greatest impact on PA core standards were really elementary school. Algebra 1 was Algebra 1, and there were some tweaks to it, but it was nowhere near the changes that were made in math at the K-6 level, and English language arts. English language arts really across even the middle schools was pretty, had a lot of significant changes. So the second thing that happened was there used to be two different assessments. There was the reading assessment that was given in grades 3 to 8, but the writing assessment was given in grades 5 and 8 only. And what they did was they changed it to an English language arts assessment that now was collective of both. So that was and so now you had components that weren't tested in grades 3, 4, 6, and 7 that now were tested. So that was a very different look for those children. And then lastly, because of the change in the test, they revamped the cut scores that would determine which scores qualified as advanced or distinguished and proficient and basic and below. So those three things all factored into this being a very different look at scores. So we just wanted people at least to get that sense. So we're just going to do a numbers run here. We'll take some quick looks at them. We can go back and forth if time allows and you want to study things a little bit further. So we'll do the middle school and we'll do the elementary schools. Then we have a little bit other information we think may be helpful to you. So this gives you a picture of the English language arts. It is fair for people to know that the proficiency rates have dropped across the state insignificantly. Okay? So you can see the 7th and 8th grade state proficiency rates and then our middle schools.
So when you look at these scores, I have no sense of the error bars and whether the difference between Holland and Richborough is real.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense of that?
No, I mean, it's when you're looking at 10 points, I'm starting to say there's a difference. You're looking at a couple of points. I mean, depending on the tested population, that could be a couple of students.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I just don't know how they wiggle from year to year.
Right. And again, what you're speaking of is really one of the things that we like to put a lot of our look at. It's about trends. Are you seeing something that is typical or atypical when you track a cohort of students from grade to grade? Are you seeing fluctuations? Are you seeing, a continued increase in scores? Do you see a particular grade level at a building or at the district level that, typically shows a drop in scores? And if so, why? So there's a lot of things that we look at besides just the numbers. You're you're trying to look at each of the elementary schools, each of the grades, looking at it district-wide, and a lot of data. And what you're going to see as we go through this, you're going to see some conflicting information that also causes us concern about what does this really mean for us, and what do we do with it? And I think you'll get a sense of it when we go a little further along.
All right, let me ask.
Yep, go ahead.
So there's about a 7-point spread, I guess, between Holland Middle School, Newtown Middle School, in 7th grade. Was that significant? Is it insignificant? How are we gauging that? What's the, what level, is it more significant at the higher end or the lower end?
Well, certainly worth looking at, but again, for us, a couple of things happen. And here's what our principals will start to do. They'll start to break down each of the components, the anchors that are measured in the test. So in English language arts, there's I don't know if anybody knows off the top of their head how many anchors that are tested. They then begin to look at where weak in any particular anchor area that maybe the other school was not, and seeing if we're weak in each of those areas across the district, then maybe we have to look at our curriculum. Is there something that we're not covering or teaching that is, not allowing our students to score correctly on those answers? Or is it really just a teacher or a building or what is happening in that particular location that we would need to pay more attention to? But 7 points is worth looking at, yes. It's not huge, but it's big enough difference.
So that's my question. Where are we putting the level reports? What's a huge number and how are we? I don't. Again, is 10 points significant? 5 is not. I'm just not sure how we're weighing it.
And again, I don't know that I feel comfortable answering it for 2 reasons. One, if this is a new test and we don't know much about it, so it's not something that helps us. To me, I wish we could have, like we've done in the past, look at the previous year. So when I'm looking at the 8th grade of this year, what did it look like at 7th grade? Were those numbers closer? Was there so in other words, if they were 7 points apart last year, 7th graders, and let's assume they took the same test and they remained 7 points apart and they both went up, well, that's probably not a major surprise. Now, somewhere there was a gap that never got closed, and then you have to go back and look at that. But if they were pretty close, let's say they were both at 76%, and now all of a sudden there's a 7-point difference in that overall achievement level, why?
All the tests given at the same kind of conditions, same time, same day of the week, same time of day, things like that.
Relatively. They give us a testing window. We do coordinate. There are some guidelines that we must follow that the state sets. There's a little flexibility at the building level. For the most part, they test in the same week, test in the morning, but one may start their test on Monday, another may start on Tuesday based on what the schedule is like, what's been planned, et cetera. But relatively within the same, it's usually about a 1-week window, and they're using 4 of the 5 days, so it's a Monday to Thursday versus a Tuesday to Friday, testing in the morning, things like that.
Playing off your idea though, if one school had more IEP or special needs students, would that impact their score when they're or is it adjusted for that?
No, this is just complete on students that scored proficient or not. And that raises a good point that is helpful for folks. If you've been around long enough, you know that when we had district classes in previous years, prior to 2 years ago, those students were attributed back to the buildings that were their home schools, even though they weren't attending school there, because they were considered part of that community, that school community. Now those students' scores count for where they attend, not what would be their home school. And again, I don't think it's not huge. I'm just giving you a sense of how the rules keep moving and the waters change, and you try to track and make some sense of all of this. So there's a lot of components to
So I have a
shift.
question. So what if you woke up one morning and said, I just have to know if these numbers have stories behind them, and you decided I'm going to spend a week of my life like following disparities and heading out into the schools and seeing, like watching the teacher, talking to people, like, would you have the time to do that? Well,
Well, there's never enough time to do all of that, but we do some of that. We do break them apart. When Joe has elementary principal meetings and I have secondary meetings, in other words, I'll just give you an example that I can speak to. Joe probably has similar ones. For next secondary principals meeting, each of the schools are bringing back information they gleaned from the PBAS, the growth part of all of this. They're dissecting their information. We're going to sit around the table and talk. We try and find best practices. At the superintendent's meeting the other day, Dr. Frazier brought up a lot of information just to kick off a way to look at it. Joe, I don't know if you want to cite any examples of some things that you
Yeah, I
folks are
think
doing.
understanding greater context. I think that you may find that consistency may result in higher scores. We had one score we took a look at in one particular grade, and we saw a couple classes that had some factors that were going on. There was, in the grade level, 26% of the children were identified with an IEP. In the same situation, there were 32 kids in the class. There were people who were new to the grade. One person went out on maternity leave. There are things that not really within our control, but there are things as context to understand that, I think you have to really understand the big picture there.
So sometimes you dig in and you find a story.
Yes.
And you can't be sure that that story is the causal thing, but you kind of, it gives you something to think about.
It is, and what we also want to do is, again, talking about comparisons from year to year. How did those students do if they were in a tested grade the previous year? Is this the same? Is this what they were performing in? Was there growth? So we do try to look deeper. We want the principals to, in their work with teams, to do the same thing.
And Joe, that's a good piece that will segue going back to what Mr. Bollick had asked in terms of sort of perspective, right? That's the word. How do you put any of this in perspective? And the answer to that question, in my opinion, is that you do that through rankings. So to go to the cohort piece, right? So we had this one group of students who, you look at their performance last year, they came out, a particular school, a particular grade level of performance, it sort of just, opened your eyes up and said, well, what happened there, right? What was it? And so as we looked into that, like, okay, well, let's take a look at that same cohort the year before in the previous grade level, and what they can't do, unfortunately, because the assessment system is not one that's perfect, is you can't just say, well, the scores went up, or the scores were the same, or the scores dropped. You can't make those judgments because, as we've talked about a lot internally here recently, and if you look back, and we'd be happy to provide this data to you, statewide, historically, we know certain subjects at certain grade levels have really high scores, and other ones have really low scores. So to point the reality to you, tell you, 4th grade math has always been high. 5th grade reading has always been low. 8th grade reading has always been high. So if you take a cohort of students and you say, well, gee, 7th grade they were here, and then the next year, 8th grade they were here, wow, fantastic, look at the growth of those students. And maybe not, because every 8th grader in the state relative to the year before went up. And we've seen the same thing. The writing test doesn't exist anymore, as Barry said, but writing, if you look at historically advanced, it's been almost non-existent. A really great school or school district is getting in 5th grade about 10% of their students scoring advanced, and many top-tier districts have gotten 4 or 5, and yet those same schools for reading in 5th grade would be getting 70–75% of their students advanced. So you can't tell me that the students are that accomplished readers and not writers. That's just, it's something with the test, or the cut scores with the test, or something with the assessment system. So how do you neutralize all that? You neutralize it through rankings. It's as simple as that. Because whether the scores at that school or grade level, whether they tend to be suppressed or whether they tend to be elevated, that truth holds true for all 500 school districts in the state. So rankings is a way to neutralize that. So for that school, that we were surprised at where the performance was at that grade level, looking back the previous year, you know what, they were pretty much in the same boat the year before, and then we started looking and it was 26% or so special education and some other demographic. It was just an abnormally different group of students from a demographic profile standpoint than what is typical for that school. So it explains at least a significant portion of it. So Mark, I hope that helps. Again, what it comes down to is how do you turn this data into information so it's meaningful, so that you have perspective of what meaningful and useful, exactly. And to me, rankings is the way you do it. Which, Rick, you asked the question, well, how can we get this Keystone first time data for other districts? And the answer is no. That's why it's problematic, because we can't even do those rankings.
In business, when we talk about subjective measures, particularly in research or something, we talk about subjective measures. We talk about inter-rater reliability, and that's where each rater may look at something and register your motions as being evidence of nervousness on the scale, and others don't. And we wind up having to do a great many of those by each rater, and we develop a corrective factor for each rater. So each rater comes to a corrective factor, and somehow in chemistry, I look at Mike and say, in chemistry, that's why we have lab samples. We have norm samples for calibration. And so I guess what you're saying is, it's not the inter-rater because the item is the same, but we have to look across to develop a correction factor by grade, because the scale being used for each grade is not the same scale. There's variability in the scale. It's interesting. So the Keystone is not available at this point to allow us to develop that inter-grade corrective factor for any longitudinal stuff. Interesting.
Correct. Can I also just say that I think Mr. Barlow's question and Dr. Foster's questions, when you asked about how much difference is significant, some of the statistical analysis that you would typically look to answer that question are not available in how they develop these tests. So to try to find out the standard deviation that are, it's not there to look at.
Can I ask you, Mr. Smith? So you dig into it and then you either understand why you did well, you didn't do well, but do we actually change how we teach kids or what we teach kids based on, and I mean, is there any use?
Yeah.
Like, to me, at the end of the day, to be perfectly honest, it's really all I care about. Are we getting information that allows us to improve how we teach kids and what we teach kids? Does that happen when we do this testing?
Absolutely. It does. You know what? There's a lot of focus on the input, meaning how do we gather data? How do we distribute it? How do we talk about it? But we really are focused on the output of, does it change our practices?
Right.
Right. And that is the focus of our conversations. And Dr. Fraser really started it the other day of, we're going to start that. We're going to start diving into it. And we get a chance to take a look, like Larry had mentioned as well, as we'll take a look at math and see, one component of it could be algebraic expressions. Are there patterns within the district or within a school, within a grade? Do we find that there's something weak? And and that's when you invite the coordinator in and you talk about that, like how we're doing and how do we do, what do we do? What are all of our tools addressing that need? Is the scope and sequence at an appropriate place where we're getting to it and make sure the children are prepared?
It's great to have the presentation of the numbers. I would more value, once you've had time to do that, to come back and say, I'd like to know effort, because how much time goes into getting information for me, it's also a factor about not detail, but and here's 2 or 3 things we found that we could improve, or it'd be good to know that there's some results, because I was asked this question directly, how do I feel about these testing? I'm like, I hate them. I hate every one of them, because I'm just so frustrated with them.
Sure.
Although I think there is value, but to get to that value seems so difficult. So I'm just.
Yeah. And there are other
That'd be
factors
great.
as well, and Dr. Foster, you had mentioned this before about, the reason why some principals and their staff will feel that they don't test on a Monday is that it's not fair to start that assessment that day. Others will feel that we start on a Monday, it gives us time for children to do that makeup and have that clean slate to start the next set of testing. So there are some variables, and it could be as much as how much do we speak to the kids to address possible anxiety? Are we relieving them so much to a point where it's something's effective, or are we not doing it enough? There are so many variables we have to take a look at. Remember as well as that the open-ended are assessed by people. That's their job all day long, is to read children's writing. And you shake your head at that, and that's so. What do we do to mimic that throughout the year? That there's a certain level of stamina of being able to write in a clear and succinct way. So there are so many things. So we could take a look at that, and that's just a part. We could take a look at one area you want, it's just a part.
So in the interest of time, I was going to say, maybe if we want to quickly take a look at each of these, just to give you that sense, and we'll post this too, and then we can go back to any of them if we have time at the end, but
But I do just have one more
people say-
question, just to slow us down a little bit more. So if it's a journey worth taking into this data to find information and get value from it, is there a strategy afoot as to what how we're gonna do that, and whether we have enough people to do it or time to do it or whatever? So that would be a nice presentation too, if,
Just information.
yeah.
I
In the
thought each
future.
principal was there.
Well, yes, but not only that. There's absolutely a principal piece to this. So we had our class administrative meeting 2 days ago, which is the meeting that Barry and Joe are referencing. So it's all out there, that they have a level of detail to information that's appropriate for them to have. And we've asked them to go back and really begin the analysis process. Part of this though goes beyond just the principal, right? Because as a principal, you can only control so much, because we have a counselor curriculum for each subject area in each grade level. And so, for instance, we see in the data, and we're not sure how meaningful it is or why it is, because we have 1 year, not any kind of trend. But in this 1 year at least, or from a ranking standpoint, as we put this in perspective, we see that for both the two new tests, remember the science is not a new test. So for the English language arts assessment and for the math assessment in 5th grade, our scores across the district are suppressed. And that doesn't mean that because the scores are low in 5th grade statewide, our ranking is suppressed. English language arts, our 6th grade ranking, they tend to be pretty high across the 10 elementary schools. So the question then just becomes, and this is the work that we need to engage in with principals, with curriculum coordinators, with the 3 of us, with Chuck, and all the key parties here, why, right? So 5th grade.
From a distance, when you hear a story like that, you think, well, a big fluctuation from 1 year to the next, like, is it real? It doesn't even matter. I mean, if you're already improved the next year, it's like, whatever, I don't know what that is.
Right. And that's part of our disadvantage right now, because we don't know that.
Right.
We got 1 year worth of data, but we're
Right,
not
but when you're
gonna
seeing
just-
something across an entire grade level across all schools, I mean, that is,
Sure, it's something, right? So
There's something there.
Or you imagine.
Right.
Yeah, so is there something in, it's not suggestive, it's just a wondering question as we sit here today. Is there something to that 5th grade curriculum in those 2 subject areas that makes you say, hey, let's take a closer look at this? Whereas we saw in 6th grade, at least for English language arts, that the performance was actually quite the opposite. And in math, it wasn't the opposite, but we were more middle of road in mathematics, whereas 5th grade just wasn't there. So
I'll take back my previous comments, because I now understand you're trying to coordinate with the state and the state standards, and it's 1 year you may get it right, and the next year it's a different subject matter, whatever, and you better match
Might
it. So if you want to match the state, then you compare rankings.
Are you saying that's a moving target from year to year?
Well, each grade level has a different curriculum, right? I mean, they build on each other. But the state testing a particular year, you may match better or worse to what the content of that test is, your curriculum. And it'll show up, and it won't really matter, and then it's not a story about building from 5th grade to 6th grade to 7th grade. It's just a story that in 1 year you match the state standards on that test better than another year. And you can say, well, part of what we do as a school district is we should match what the state wants us to be teaching, I guess.
How often do the state standards change?
significantly, well, a couple years ago with P4.
Sure.
Prior to that, not recently, you have
This is a
states.
bouncing ball.
Well, it's not, that piece is not a bouncing ball. It's been a bouncing ball for the past really 3 years, pushing 4 years, because remember first it was, are we gonna do Common Core? Yes, we're gonna do Common Core. And then quite frankly, a lot of districts, Council Rock included, put a lot of work into revising curriculum, and in the 11th hour, our government stepped in and said, "Oop, moratorium on the Common Core. We need to study this more." So we went then back. We reverted back to the PA academic standards, the historical legacy standards, and then it came back as the PA core standards, which are really still the Common Core, just rebranded, some differences, but more similarities. And so this is our second year of implementation of these new standards. First year represented here of assessing those new standards.
Did you say they moved to supervision?
The other piece, any time you have a new assessment, you have to set cut scores. And one of the little secrets around cut scores is that you go through the administration process and you go through the scoring process, right? And then you set cut scores. That's how it works. So you don't set the cut scores before they're scored. You see what the results are, you see what the scores are, and then the cut scores are set. I'm no expert on that. I don't know that any of us
So
are
are the
experts
cut
on that.
scores, are the cut scores
That's
set
the sequence.
by like a standard T distribution?
I can't do it.
So, do they publish the numbers that say 5%? I mean, right, standard T distribution, you have two standard deviations, it's gonna cover 95%. You're gonna have 66% either side is gonna move from one standard deviation. Is that how they're establishing the cut scores? So that they're saying that's where we are, or are they saying, no, because everybody, I always laugh. If you looked at the MSQT, the PSATs and MSQTs, National Merit Scholars Qualifying Tests, if you looked at it just based on what we do, it's bizarre because we get 15 kids. You're supposed to, we should by rights have like 4, if you went by those numbers. But we get 15 to 20 kids.
So if you think about the psychometric, it was difficult about that for a long time, not just for, so they were raising the number of students that had conforming to a freshman base. So that's part of it. So there's statistical method of getting those.
That's bizarre. In doubt.
So is there a comparison or perspective on these scores relative to what our kids' report cards look like? Because, I see lots of kids who are A and B students based on their report cards scoring as non-proficient, below proficient. And I start to worry about that. I have more faith in what we're doing in our schools in those grades than I do these tests. But have you guys looked at that to say, hey?
You know what, I'm going to skip a bunch of slides. I want to show you something that will add to this conversation that I think is very interesting, if you bear with me. Because this,
But
I
this
think,
presentation will be available
Yes.
online and you can
Actually,
see the
people
entire.
watching it live are like going, something's wrong with the audio.
so if you want to take a quick look at this, so 8th graders take both PSSA and some 8th graders. So we wanted to get a sense of it, because our 8th grade math proficiency rates were very low, but our Keystone exam rates were very high. We're in the 98th percentile. So we wanted to find out of those students that took the Algebra 1 Keystone exam. You can see that that's 25% of the students that scored proficient or advanced on the Keystone exam did not score proficient in the PSSA. Now again,
At the same age on the same test.
in the same
Same
spring.
Same student,
Yeah, same student,
Right.
yes.
different test, same
But-
student.
Different to the same test, same age.
Because it's gonna send the wrong message.
They were all eighth
One, they
graders.
have to
They
pass
can
to
both
get out of
pass.
high school, so they think,
Mhm.
and one is a PSS.
But again, I think the intent was, we want to look at what are these contributing factors. That was just something that just stood out. And the reason why we looked this time was because our PSSA scores showed such a decline for 8th grade PSSA math. So we said, well, gosh, we have a good number of those kids that take the Keystone exam, which you would, as a graduation requirement, would expect. It's a pretty rigorous exam. It's
Yeah.
Algebra 1. So we pulled each of those students in our 3 middle schools, and this is what we found. And it's, again, I show it because, it adds to the conversation based on what we're hearing around the table.
Is that like a March test versus a May test also?
No, it was April was the
April was
PSSA and May was the Keystone exam. So they were
They
within
may have had a little bit more.
3 weeks. Yeah, but again, just
Not
out of
much.
interest for you.
And one of them, I think, made it spring break.
What?
Spring break, we're, held, so.
Right, that's right, spring break was in between.
I do want to touch on this, and then we can go back with any other time and look through the charts, because this question did come up about testing exclusions, the opt-out, and what's happening both within Council Rock as well as around the state. So as you can see, even with the increase that we saw from 14 to 15, a relatively small number of students within Council Rock are opting out of our exams. If you opt out or elect to opt out of the Keystone exam, again, this is for religious reasons, you must go into a PBA. You may not opt out of the PBA. So most of these, as you can see, are middle school and elementary school. You can see the breakout of students, how many schools. You can see across the state, again, you're seeing more students because there are a number of districts where it's certainly a much bigger issue. We don't advocate for it. We think that, even though there are differences that people have with the test, the reality is it's good information. No one's ever suggested that the test is not a quality exam or worth looking at how students are performing. How it's used is where most of the philosophical issues come into place. But as you read about and hear about, even locally, you do see this opt-out movement growing nationally, not just in Pennsylvania where there are other state tests. But that just gives you a sense of what's going on with that. So we were asked to at least give people a picture.
And what are the implications of this if it were to escalate? What does it mean to us?
The opt-out, even as it happened with the legislation with No Child Left Behind, really affects Title I schools. So there was always some confusion about what would happen if when we were in the typical No Child Left Behind and weren't meeting annual adequately yearly progress, what would happen? Our sense of it, and we haven't had to address it yet, there were all these components put into place about shifting staff, moving principals, and notifications and giving school choice within the school district. We've never had to see what happens when you went far enough down that path because they changed the No Child Left Behind and gave these waivers to states. But my understanding, and Dr. Fraser, you speak up, or Joe, if you know, that it was really only for Title I schools that would be affected by it. We have a few Title I schools, but we've never been in a position where we have reached that point where we have had to be concerned. And I guess you're speaking most especially about if our the percent of participation rate drops.
Right.
Yeah. So
how you're going to administer this test to a child? How does the child become identified with a certain set of test results? How is that? How is the child, do you identify individual children with test results or just aggregate?
Oh yeah, the state individual, yes, every test is attached to a student.
How is that student identified to their results? Who fills that in? Does it have a name on it when they get it, or?
Most of the time it's through a pre-coded label that's provided to us from the state, from the testing agency.
With each child's name?
Yes. And a ID. Each student in Pennsylvania has a state ID.
And that's always been the case.
Yes.
That's fine. I just wondered, if a child marred that result and still took the test?
We upload that information from our student information.
I understand that.
And then what
If the
happens
child
is
marked the paper they were taking.
every time it's checked back in,
Yeah.
there's the principal sitting and looks at every book and counts them with
That's fine.
the teacher and looks at each book. And then before we send them out, to make sure that they're not damaged. Yeah.
I am reminded of the old story of a kid in a large class taking a test in college. When the proctor saw him do it and said, "I want to talk to you." And the kid came down with a large stack of paper on the pile. And the teacher said to him, "Do you know who are you?" The kid said, "You don't know who I am?" The teacher said, "No." The kid stuck his paper in the middle, knocked the pile on the floor, and walked out. Meaning that he took the test, you figure it out. So I'm just wondering, could we comply with the law of taking the test and defeat the accountant? I just wondered.
I'll let you answer that, Dr. Fraser.
Don't go there, we'll talk to counsel later.
I'll I'll just say this,
Glad this
which will not be an answer to your question. I'll say this, I would not, want the school district to take the position where we encourage students to opt out of these assessments. And the reason, I know. And the reason being is very simple. If we were, I've already spoken earlier in this meeting to a level of optimism that I personally have, and I think is an maturity that we have with the leadership at the Department of Education at this point. So I think we need to allow some processes to play out with those folks. Coupled with that, then, is and we've talked a lot about it here, we need this feedback. We have to get these results to see what's working, what's not working. Do we have gaps curricularly? Do we have deficiencies? Where are the strengths? What professional development is working? What isn't working? If we would have any significant level of opt-outs, then we're not getting that level of data back that still allows it to be valid and reliable information for us. I just find that to be problematic. If we didn't have faith that the system was going to improve, then sure, let's make the strategic decision and create some chaos and send a message and enforce some change with the powers that be. I just don't think that that's where we're at as we sit here today with Pedro Rivera as Secretary of Education, and that this particular administration in the Department of Education, personal feeling.
I can appreciate that. I just don't want to be in a position where discouraging.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, no, great point. I'm glad that you just said that. We actually have a statutory obligation to educate parents on what that process looks like, which quite frankly is a pretty easy process. You set up an appointment with the principal, you review the assessment, you send an email to the superintendent requesting that you opt out for religious reasons, no questions asked, no rationale needs to be given, and then you're granted that opt out. It's truly as simple as that. So we educate parents on what that process looks like in advance. And so once the text booklets arrive, which is typically a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks before the actual tests start, it's that 2-3 week window when folks are able to set up those appointments, go in with the principal or test coordinator in the building, take a look at them, send an email, and it's an automatic yes. So we do educate and inform people on how to do that.
I do want to just show one more slide so when people access it, they'll know what this speaks to. You'll see a number of these by grade level or by, and they all look a little bit different, but this is that component that we talked about with growth. So this is not broken down by school, by student, by teacher, but this is by Keystone Algebra 1. So all of our students who took a Keystone Algebra 1, this reflects that they made a year's worth of growth based on that testing. So in other words, dark blue is a significant level of growth, light blue, decent level of growth.
This is their best effort or first year?
Pardon me?
This is their best cumulative effort for those who took it?
No, this is over this particular testing
First time.
year. Yes, first time. And you'll see it, and it will look different. So here's one that's not as strong. And I just picked it because I saw some yellow and red. So in this particular case in 6th grade math across the district, you see about 3/4 of our students, green being they made a year's worth of growth, right where they should have been. The light blue and dark blue was well beyond that. Yellow is that caution, and red is a group of students who did not reflect a year's worth of growth.
Barry, is this directly from PDE or is this a slide you created?
This is PDE. They provide this for us.
And this information also is available. We have access to a password protected PBOS site. There's also a public PBOS site. So these slides, I haven't gone through it this year's yet, so I'm assuming they're up. But these slides are available to the public on the public PBOS site.
And you'll see again, obviously different subject, but the inconsistencies. You look at that same 6th grade group and look at them in English language arts, and that's what you see. So again, more information, more data to consider, but I wanted people to know what these charts reflect. So if you look through them on the PowerPoint, you'll have a sense of that. Okay?
Thank you very much, everyone.
Very good. Thanks.
Oh, did you have any public comments?
Sure.
It's not gonna.
Adam?
Say what for that. But that's not. You doing, Rich?
He don't.
Just one more meeting.